The hum of the engine suddenly sputtered, then cut out entirely. Olivia Carter's heart sank as her luxury sedan lost power, coasting forward before slowing to a full stop on the side of the empty highway. She frowned, gripping the steering wheel, and turned the key again. Nothing. The engine didn't even try to turn over. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She exhaled sharply, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face as she glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. It wasn't gas. Maybe the battery? But how? The car was practically brand new, top of the line, meant to handle long drives with ease. With a sigh, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out onto the hot pavement. The late afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the deserted road, the air thick with warmth. She opened the hood, not because she knew what to look for, but because that's what people did in movies when their cars broke down. The engine sat there like an unsolvable puzzle, wires and belts neatly in place at least, as far as she could tell. Her phone. Maybe she could call for roadside assistance. Olivia reached into her purse and pulled it out, only to groan in frustration when she saw the screen no signal. Perfect. Leaning against the car, she rubbed her temples. This was not how her day was supposed to go. She had been on her way to check in on one of her company's properties before heading home. It was a simple trip, so she hadn't thought to bring her wallet. Why would she? She wasn't stopping anywhere that required money. Now here she was stuck, unable to call for help, and completely unprepared to deal with the situation. She wasn't used to things going wrong like this. Olivia had spent years building her business from the ground up, managing a chain of high-end car dealerships across multiple cities. Her life was structured, calculated. She anticipated problems before they arose, made sure things ran smoothly. But today the universe had other plans. She crossed her arms, scanning the horizon. Cars zoomed past in the distance, their drivers oblivious to her predicament. Surely someone will stop. People help stranded drivers all the time, right? 10 minutes passed. Then 20. A few cars slowed slightly, as if debating whether to stop, but none did. Olivia felt a flicker of frustration. Would I stop for someone if I were in their position? The thought unsettled her. She liked to think she would, but deep down, she wasn't sure. As she debated her next move, walk back to town or wait, an old pickup truck appeared in the distance. Unlike the others, this one actually slowed as it neared her car. Her heart lifted slightly. The truck pulled onto the shoulder a few feet behind her, the driver's side door creaking open. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing worn jeans and a grease-stained t-shirt. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and his hands, rough and calloused, told a story of long hours spent working with machines. He had the rugged look of someone who worked with his hands for a living, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, warm, kind, carrying a quiet sincerity. Car trouble, he called as he approached, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his back pocket. Olivia hesitated for half a second before nodding. Yeah, it just stopped. I have no idea why. The man gave the car a once-over before tilting his head toward her. Mind if I take a look? She considered the offer. Normally, she'd be wary of a stranger stopping on the side of the road, but there was something about him that made her feel safe. And really, what choice did she have? She nodded. Please. That would be great. He gave a small nod and stepped closer, popping the hood with practiced ease. Olivia watched as he leaned in, hands moving with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She shifted on her feet. Are you a mechanic? Something like that, he said with a small chuckle. Name's Jack, by the way. Olivia. Well, Olivia, he said, peering into the engine. Let's see what's going on here. She folded her arms, watching him work. He moved with an effortless rhythm, checking connections, testing a few things under the hood. The whole situation felt strange to her, standing here, relying on a stranger's kindness. She wasn't used to needing help. As Jack worked, Olivia couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. How did I let myself end up in this situation? She was supposed to be capable, independent. Yet here she was, stranded, hoping a man she had never met would be able to fix whatever was wrong. After a few minutes, Jack straightened up and wiped his hands on the rag. I think I found the problem. Olivia perked up. What is it? He gave her a reassuring smile. Nothing major. But you wouldn't have been able to drive it like this. Relief washed over her, but before she could ask more, Jack was already reaching for his tools. Maybe today isn't going to be a complete disaster after all. Jack crouched beside the car, his fingers expertly navigating the engine's components. Olivia stood by, arms crossed, shifting her weight as she watched him work. So what's wrong with it? She asked, hoping it wasn't anything serious. Jack pulled a wrench from his toolbox and started adjusting something under the hood. Loose belt, he said simply. Not a big deal, but it came off just enough to stop your car from running. Olivia exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and embarrassment. That's it. That's it? He confirmed with a small chuckle. Could have happened to anyone. These things can shift over time, especially with a newer car like this. Nothing you could have done differently. Despite his reassurance, Olivia still felt uneasy. Cars were supposed to just work, especially ones as expensive as hers. She rarely had to think about maintenance beyond scheduled service visits at one of her dealerships. Jack tightened the belt into place, checking it twice before stepping back and wiping his hands on his rag again. All right, go ahead and try starting it now. She hesitated for a moment, then got back into the driver's seat. Turning the key, she felt a small surge of hope. The engine roared back to life, smooth and steady, as if nothing had ever been wrong. A delighted smile spread across her face. She got out of the car again, shutting the door behind her. That's amazing. I seriously thought I was going to have to call a tow truck. Jack shrugged. Glad you don't have to. She instinctively reached for her purse, then winced when she remembered. No wallet. No cash. Nothing. A flush of embarrassment crept up her neck as she looked back at him. Oh no, I just realized I don't have my wallet with me. I wasn't expecting to need it. But I can pay you later. Just give me your number, and I'll send it as soon as I get home. Jack waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about it. She blinked. What? He smiled, brushing off the concern. It wasn't a big job. Didn't take much time. You don't owe me anything. Olivia stared at him. She was used to people expecting payment for everything, especially when it came to cars. Mechanics never worked for free. And yet, here was this man, a total stranger, who had not only stopped to help but was refusing to charge her at all. That doesn't seem fair, she said, still trying to process it. I mean, you just fixed my car. You should get something for your time. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. I've been in your shoes before. Sometimes people just need a hand. Besides, I wouldn't feel right charging you for something so simple. Olivia didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to generosity like this. It wasn't that she was ungrateful, far from it. But in her world, business was business. Deals were made, transactions completed. People didn't just give away their time and skills without expecting something in return. Jack must have noticed her hesitation, because he gave her a reassuring nod. Really, it's fine. Just drive safe, all right. She searched his face for any sign that he might be saying it just to be polite, but there was only sincerity in his expression. For the first time in a long while, Olivia felt genuinely humbled. She reached out a hand. Thank you, Jack. Really. He shook it firmly, then tipped his head toward his truck. I should get going. Got a long day tomorrow at the shop. She nodded, still feeling slightly stunned. Right, well, thanks again. I won't forget this. Jack simply smiled, then turned and climbed back into his truck. Within moments, he was pulling away, the old vehicle kicking up a small cloud of dust as it merged back onto the road. Olivia watched him disappear down the highway, a strange warmth settling in her chest. She had no idea that this small encounter would soon change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have ever expected. Olivia couldn't stop thinking about Jack's kindness, even as she went about her usual routine. She had spent years building Carter Logistics, her delivery service that managed hundreds of vehicles across multiple cities. In her world, everything revolved around efficiency, contracts, and transactions. Every decision she made had to make financial sense. People didn't just help for the sake of it. At least, not in her experience. She thought back to how Jack had so casually dismissed payment, how he had fixed her car without hesitation and then simply driven away, expecting nothing in return. She had spent years surrounded by people who always wanted something from her, employees looking for raises, clients negotiating better rates, competitors trying to outmaneuver her. Even friendships and relationships often came with expectations. Jack was different. His kindness had been simple and effortless, as if helping a stranger was just a normal part of his day. And that was what made it so rare. She tapped her fingers against her desk, deep in thought. Then, on impulse, she grabbed her laptop and started looking up small auto repair shops in town. She hadn't asked Jack where he worked, but something about him, his worn clothes, his practical attitude told her he wasn't part of some major chain or high-end service center. After a few searches, she found what she was looking for. A small garage on the outskirts of town, Monroe Auto Repairs. She smiled. That had to be him. Without overthinking it, she grabbed her purse and headed out the door. Monroe Auto Repairs was exactly what she expected. The garage was old, but not neglected, small but functional. The paint on the sign was chipped, and an old vending machine sat by the entrance, humming faintly. A few cars were parked outside, including an old truck propped up on a jack. It was the kind of place built on hard work, not fancy branding. She stepped inside, immediately hit with the familiar scent of motor oil, grease, and rubber. The walls were lined with tools and spare parts, and the air carried the faint hum of an engine running in the back. A young man behind the counter, probably in his early 20s, glanced up from a parts catalog. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm looking for Jack Monroe." Before he could respond, a familiar voice called from the back. "Yeah." Jack stepped into view, his expression shifting from surprise to curiosity. He still wore the same grease-stained t-shirt from yesterday, his hands rough and streaked with oil. "Olivia," he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. "Did your car break down again?" She smiled. "No, it's running perfectly. Thanks to you." Jack studied her for a moment, then crossed his arms. "Then what brings you all the way out here?" Olivia suddenly felt a bit awkward. She wasn't used to showing up unannounced, especially not for personal reasons. "Why am I nervous?" She took a breath, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to properly thank you." Jack hesitated before taking it, his fingers slightly smudged with grease as he opened the envelope. His eyes widened. "This is $10,000. He looked up at her, clearly stunned. "Olivia, I told you you didn't owe me anything." "I know," she said warmly. "But I wanted to do this, and—" Jack shook his head, taking a step back as if the money was too much to even hold. "I can't take this. I just fixed a loose belt." "That's nothing. I do that every day." "But you didn't have to do it for me," Olivia pointed out. "You didn't even know me, and you helped anyway. That's not nothing." Jack exhaled, still looking at the check like it might disappear. "Look, I appreciate this really, but I don't do things expecting a reward." "I know," she said with a small smile. "And that's exactly why I'm giving it to you." He glanced around the shop, then back at her. She could see it in his eyes, the internal struggle. Pride versus practicality. $10,000 could change a lot for a small business like his. She decided to push a little further. That's not all, she continued. I own Carter Logistics, a delivery service. We have a whole fleet of trucks, vans, and cars that constantly need maintenance and repairs. Jack's brows lifted slightly, the gears in his mind turning. I want to offer you a contract, she said. Whenever my vehicles need servicing, your shop gets the job. Regular work, guaranteed pay. No more slow seasons, no more worrying about getting by. Jack blinked. You're serious? Completely. He let out a low whistle, rubbing the back of his neck. That's a big deal. It is, she agreed. And I wouldn't offer it if I didn't believe you deserved it. Jack let out a short laugh, shaking his head. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, Olivia said with a grin. Jack looked down at the check again, then around his garage. She could see the wheels turning in his mind. The shop was his life, his passion, but it had probably been struggling for years. A contract like this could change everything. Finally, he exhaled, a slow smile spreading across his face. All right, he said, extending his hand. We've got ourselves a deal. Olivia took his hand and shook it firmly, feeling an unexpected sense of satisfaction, not from closing a deal, not from making a smart business move, but from simply doing something good. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Jack still couldn't quite believe what had just happened. As Olivia left the shop, her offer hanging in the air like the smell of motor oil and grease, he found himself staring at the check in his hands. $10,000. More money than he'd seen at once in a long time. More than enough to fix up the shop, upgrade his tools, and maybe even take a weekend off for once in his life. But it wasn't just the money that had him shaken. It was the contract. A real contract. Steady work. A partnership with a company that owned hundreds of vehicles. He'd spent years barely scraping by, watching bigger, fancier auto shops steal business with their glossy advertisements and corporate backing. Meanwhile, he had to rely on word of mouth and locals who trusted him enough to bring their cars to a rundown shop with a faded sign. And now, just because he had helped someone on the side of the road, everything was about to change. His younger employee, Cody, stepped out from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. Did I just hear that right? Jack blinked, still staring at the check. That woman, Cody said, gesturing toward the door. Did she seriously just hand you 10 grand? Jack let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. Cody whistled low. Man, I need to start helping people on the side of the road. Jack gave a small chuckle but shook his head. It's not about the money. She's offering a contract too. Cody raised his eyebrows. What kind of contract? Jack hesitated before answering, almost as if saying it out loud would make it too real. She owns a delivery service. Carter Logistics. Hundreds of vehicles. Wants to send all their maintenance and repair work here. Cody stared at him. Dude. Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. Cody grinned. So why do you look like you just got hit by a truck? Jack let out a breath and rubbed the back of his neck. Because I'm trying to figure out if this is real life. Cody laughed. Well, if it's a dream, don't wake up, he clapped Jack on the shoulder. So what are you gonna do? Jack sighed. But there was a flicker of something in his chest hope. I already said yes. Cody whooped, pumping his fist in the air. Yes. Finally, some real business coming through this place. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. The reality of it was still sinking in. He had worked for years, trying to make this shop something more than just a struggling small business. And now, because he had done what felt like the most natural thing in the world, helping someone who needed it, he was on the verge of something bigger than he had ever imagined. 2 days later, Olivia was back, this time with paperwork in hand. She walked into the shop, looking just as polished and put together as before, but there was something different about her demeanor. She looked lighter. Jack noticed it immediately. "You actually came back," he said, giving her a teasing smile. Olivia smirked. "I keep my promises." He wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward the thick folder in her hands. "Is that what I think it is?" She placed it on the counter. Standard contract. Nothing tricky. Just a solid deal that guarantees your shop gets priority servicing for Carter Logistics vehicles. She hesitated. "I had my legal team draft it up, but I made sure it was fair. If you need to change anything, let me know." Jack raised an eyebrow, flipping through the first few pages. It was simple. No hidden clauses. No loopholes designed to put him at a disadvantage. Just a straightforward agreement that would give him more work than he'd ever dreamed of. He looked up at her. "You really meant it?" Olivia held his gaze. "Yes." Jack felt something settle in his chest. He had spent years dealing with tough customers, bad business deals, and people trying to cut corners at his expense. But Olivia wasn't like that. She had everything: money, success, a company that ran like clockwork. And yet she had gone out of her way to do this. Not because she had to. Not because it benefited her. But because she wanted to. He set the contract down and reached for a pen. "All right," he said, signing his name. "Let's do this." Olivia grinned. "Welcome to Carter Logistics." Jack chuckled. "Welcome to Monroe Auto Repairs." Over the next few weeks, things changed fast. The first Carter Logistics truck rolled into the shop within days of the contract being signed. Then another. Then another. Soon, Jack and Cody were working long hours just to keep up with demand. Jack finally had to do something he had never seriously considered before: hire more help. His shop, the same one that had been struggling for years, was now thriving. And it wasn't just about the business. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by again, leaning against the counter as she watched him work. She had started coming around more often, checking in on the trucks, making sure everything was running smoothly. But Jack suspected it was more than that. "You know," he said as he tightened a bolt under the hood, "I still don't understand why you went out of your way to do all this." Olivia was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because no one's ever done something like this for me." Jack looked up at her. She gave him a small smile. "People always expect something from me. Business deals, negotiations, partnerships, there's always an angle. No one's ever done something just to help me. Until you." Jack let that sit between them for a moment. Then, he smiled. "Well," he said, "guess you're just paying it forward." Olivia chuckled. "Guess I am." Jack wiped his hands and leaned against the counter. "You know, for a millionaire, you're not half bad." She laughed, shaking her head. "For a mechanic, neither are you." And for the first time in a long while, they both realized something. Success wasn't just about money, contracts, or the next big opportunity. Sometimes it was just about doing the right thing. Jack never thought he'd see the day when Monroe Auto Repairs was busy not just with the occasional walk-in customer or a friend needing a tune-up, but with real, consistent work. The Carter Logistics contract had transformed his small shop overnight. What used to be slow days filled with uncertainty were now packed with trucks rolling in and out, parts being ordered in bulk, and schedules being filled weeks in advance. For the first time in years, Jack didn't have to worry about whether he'd make enough to cover the shop's expenses. He could finally invest in better tools, upgrade the outdated equipment, and even fix the damn leak in the roof that had been dripping every time it rained. And maybe the biggest change? He was hiring. Cody had been working overtime ever since the contract started, and Jack knew he couldn't keep running things with just one extra pair of hands. So for the first time in his life, he put out a "now hiring" sign. Within a week, he had 2 new mechanics in the shop: a young guy fresh out of trade school, and an experienced tech who had been let go from a bigger dealership. Jack had gone from barely scraping by to giving other people jobs. And it all started because he had pulled over for a stranger on the side of the road. Olivia had become a regular presence at the shop. At first, she came by just to check in on the contract, making sure everything was running smoothly. But over time, it became clear that she wasn't just there for business. She would linger a little longer than necessary, watching the guys work, laughing at Cody's sarcastic remarks, occasionally bringing coffee for everyone when she knew they had a long day ahead. Jack noticed it, even if she never outright said anything. One evening, after the last truck of the day had been serviced, Olivia leaned against the counter while Jack finished wiping his hands clean. "You ever take a day off?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "Not really in the habit of it." She smirked. "Figures." Jack crossed his arms. "Why? You got some millionaire advice about work-life balance for me." Olivia laughed. "I own a logistics company, Jack. My entire business is built on keeping people working around the clock." "Fair point." "Babe?" She hesitated, then gave him a thoughtful look. "You know, I've been thinking." Jack raised an eyebrow. Oh." She rolled her eyes but continued. "I never told you this, but when my business was still small, I almost lost everything. There was a point where I had more trucks breaking down than I had money to fix them. I was drowning in costs, and no one was willing to cut me a break. Everyone wanted their payment up front, no exceptions." Jack listened, intrigued. Olivia didn't talk much about her struggles. She always carried herself like someone who had everything figured out. "I had to take out a massive loan," she said, shaking her head. "I worked day and night to keep things going. And I remember thinking, why doesn't anyone just help people when they need it?" Jack nodded, understanding more than she realized. "That's why what you did meant so much," she admitted. "It wasn't about the car. It was about the fact that someone you actually just helped. No contracts, no deals, no strings attached." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a little awkward under the weight of her words. "Well, you were stranded. Wasn't exactly a life or death situation, but I figured you'd appreciate not sleeping in your car." She smiled. "You don't even realize how rare that is, do you?" Jack shrugged. "I dunno. I guess I just believe people should help each other when they can." She studied him for a second, then nodded, like she was confirming something to herself. "You ever thought about expanding?" she asked suddenly. Jack blinked. "Expanding?" She gestured around the shop. "You're getting more business than ever, your team is growing. What if Monroe Auto Repairs wasn't just one shop? What if you had a second location?" Jack let out a short laugh. "Whoa. Slow down there, business lady. I just got used to the idea of not being broke." Olivia smirked. "Think about it though. With the amount of work you're getting, you could have a second shop across town. Maybe even in another city. You'd never have to worry about slow seasons again." Jack ran a hand through his hair. It was a crazy idea. A big idea. But then again, wasn't that exactly what had landed him in this position in the first place? A single moment of generosity had led to an opportunity he never saw coming. Maybe this was just the next step. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's a big leap." "Well," Olivia said with a grin, "if you ever decide to go for it, you know someone who believes in you." Jack looked at her, realizing something in that moment. This woman, this incredibly successful, driven business owner, had everything money could buy. But what she valued most wasn't wealth. It wasn't profits or status. It was people. And in a world where everything had a price tag, that made her one of a kind. He smiled. "I'll think about it." She smiled back. "Good." Weeks turned into months, and Jack's shop continued to thrive. The contract with Carter Logistics ensured steady business, but more than that, it brought something bigger, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just another struggling mechanic anymore. He was running a real operation, giving people jobs, helping keep an entire fleet running. And as time passed, The idea Olivia had planted in his head, the crazy idea of expanding, didn't seem so crazy anymore. One evening, as he closed up the shop, his phone buzzed with a text. Olivia said, "Busy tomorrow." Jack smirked, shaking his head as he typed back. Jack said, "Depends." "Why?" Olivia said, "I was thinking you could use a break." "Dinner." Jack chuckled, slipping his phone into his pocket. Maybe his life really was changing. And maybe, just maybe, some things were meant to happen exactly as they did.